speaking of the dream, it is still alive for Carolina women's basketball to win another national championship. We're going to talk to Brad Muller about that here in just a second. We've got another great voice of Carolina coming up at 11 o'clock, Derek Scott, and we'll talk some men's hoops with him, the men's Final Four, and then, of course, Carolina baseball as they head to Starkville this weekend to the Dude to take on Mississippi State. We've got a baseball bulletin today. And are the Heisman chances for Lenora Sellers stronger than you think? They might be. We'll tell you why here in just a little while. But it is basketball season, and Brad has been kind enough to step aside somewhere quiet in Amalie Arena down in Tampa, Florida. Tomorrow night, 7 o'clock tip for the fourth time this year, Brad, the Texas Longhorns and the South Carolina Gamecocks. But nothing will be bigger than this one when they square off in the Final Four. It's the first time that Texas has been there since 2003. Gamecocks are pretty used to this. So maybe they'll show them. Or here's how you do things around here, Longhorns. This is this is the media room, and this is how you do all that type of stuff. But so good to see you, man. I guess they were practicing this morning at 9 o'clock, right?
Yeah, they're still out there on the floor behind me, down below, and getting their full practice in. They'll have a shoot around in the gym tomorrow for about an hour, and so hopefully, be ready to rock and roll. And it's just always great to be here. You try not to take it for granted that it's kind of neat. 5 years in a row, it's pretty tough to do.
Yeah, well, there's no question about that. We were going over all the Final Four numbers the other day, and it almost gets lost sometimes that UConn has now been there 20 times in 25 years.
Yeah,
because they haven't won one since 2016. This has been the Gamecocks show for almost the last decade when it comes to actually bringing the titles home. But when you actually now settle in and look at the entirety of this women's Final Four, Carolina, a familiar face, and they're back. Obviously, UConn, a familiar face, and they're back. And they got some new blood in there for the first time ever since the sport has been sponsored by the NCAA. UCLA has entered. I believe this is the 14th different women's program, Brad, in 6 years, which is great for the sport.
Yep.
That includes Texas. So, but these are four that you legitimately can argue with the injury to Juju Watkins and what happened with Southern Cal. These are four of the best 5 programs in the country.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, that's the point I was going to make with the injury to Juju Watkins. You got the 4 best teams in terms of available talent, I think, for this year's Final Four. And that's what makes it so fun, because it's a lot of interesting matchups. Obviously, South Carolina and Texas, this will be the 4th time. They both know each other really well, but a tough matchup, even though South Carolina has won 2 out of 3 because of the size Texas has. And on the other side, same thing. UCLA, before we played them back at the beginning of the year, I thought they were the best team on paper. When they beat Carolina in Los Angeles, that kind of confirmed they were. I thought, that they've got the best talent in terms of 1 through 5 and depth of talent in the post. And then you've got a Connecticut team that may be playing better than anybody right now. They might have the most talent in terms of number of individuals, but the 2 that are playing really well, Paige Beckers and Sarah Strong, right now are better than anyone on the floor. So it's some really interesting matchups, and it's just a matter of who's going to get some shots to fall for them, starting tomorrow night.
Well, when you're in the Final Four, clearly, Brad, don't need a lot of motivational tactics and things like that. You're going out there to play for a title. If you're not motivated, you shouldn't be playing the sport. But the Gamecocks have 3 losses this year, and it just so happens all 3 of those teams happen to be in this same arena this weekend. That's probably adding a little bit of spice to what's going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, certainly, because for one, obviously, you've beaten Texas 2 out of 3, but this is the biggest stage. You did beat them to earn a trophy for the SEC tournament championship, and you guys were co-champions, so that was a big deal to win the SEC tournament over them because there was a trophy on the line. And same thing here, because you're playing to get to the game that gets you the trophy. So no loss in motivation there. Obviously, Texas wants to prove that they can beat us and kind of even the score on the bigger stage. And then on the other side of it, you've got 2 teams that really handed it to South Carolina this year. UCLA beat us pretty bad at their place in Los Angeles, and it was the same thing for Connecticut at Colonial Life Arena. They played about as well as they could have played. South Carolina played about as poorly as they could have played. But if South Carolina is able to get past Texas, whichever team they face, I'm sure there'll be a little bit of a chip on their shoulder. But I'm also sure they would love that underdog role.
Oh yeah, there's no question about it. You know, Don is a master when it comes to these things, and we all know that, Brad. As far as the Longhorns go, going back to their 58, I think it was 58, right? 58-47, I believe it was, victory over TCU just a couple of days ago. Prior to that, they took down the Vols. They beat Illinois. They beat William and Mary when they eclipsed the 100-point mark. How much have you followed them here in the tournament, and what have you learned that maybe you didn't? I don't want to say that you didn't know, but what have you seen from them here as the postseason has come along?
One thing that's really impressed me about Texas in the postseason is their defense. They forced a lot of turnovers, and I feel like they've really turned it up a notch in terms of getting in your face with the man-to-man coverage. If you watch that TCU game, they had them rattled with how they were basically wearing the same jersey almost. You know, they were so up close. Even when someone was 25 feet from the basket, they were right on them because they have confidence that you're not going to be able to dribble past their defenders. And their defense has really impressed me with just how much energy their defense has, and it's really caused a lot of problems.
Based on how South Carolina has played in the postseason, how do you see the matchup?
It'll be interesting. You know, the last three games, it sounds funny to say this because we're here at the Final Four, but South Carolina has certainly not played its best basketball the last three games when you look at the number of turnovers and rebounds. I think in the last two games, the Gamecocks had 16 and 18 turnovers in the last two games, which is not good. They usually take decent care of the basketball, around 12 turnovers a game, so way over their average, and a lot of unforced turnovers as well. And that's what makes it a little disturbing when we play a team that really gets after it defensively like Texas. And then rebounding was huge, especially in the game against Duke, which Duke was not a bigger team than South Carolina. It was pretty much an even matchup size-wise, and South Carolina got dominated on the glass. I think they only had 6 offensive rebounds the entire game, and I think maybe half of them came in the fourth quarter. So South Carolina's going to have to do a better job of getting some energy under the boards and not just watching the shots go up. You know, they're going to have to give themselves some second chances and aggressively go after rebounds against a bigger Texas team. So they're going to those are the things that concern me the most, especially with the offensive rebounding.
Yeah, who becomes maybe, I don't want to say more valuable, as I don't want to undervalue anybody that's played throughout the season, but what is there a key player or two now? Because we watched that blueprint from Duke. Gamecocks only had 7 assists in that game as well on made baskets. They had 19 that went through the hoops. Just 7 of those were assisted upon. And you mentioned the Texas defense. So what does that mean for this team that's going to be on the floor tomorrow night? Who are some players that probably need to step up and absorb some of this?
Well, I think something that's going to be important, South Carolina's got to get its bench going again. And that's something that's carried them all season long, is the equal number of minutes between their starting 5 and the second wave, if you will, to really keep some fresh legs out there. That wasn't the case in the Duke game. It was the starting 5 that were in there most of the fourth quarter. Not that there's anything wrong with any of those players, certainly, but you want to see a little bit more performance out of that second wave, whether it's Mylasia Fulwiley, who had a really good game in the Sweet 16, but was kind of quiet in the Elite 8. Same with Tessa Johnson, been a little bit quiet. We know what she can do in the postseason. And I think that the biggest thing, and we talked about this last week, got to find a way to get Joyce Edwards going. She was so good this year in her freshman season, first team All SEC. In the last 3 games, it's been a struggle. I think she's averaging about 5.5 points per game in the last 3 tournament games and is shooting under 30%. And this is someone who was before that was shooting close to 60% because most of her shots are going to be from 4 feet or less. And for whatever reason, it's just been a struggle for her the last 3 games, shooting under 30%. So I think you got to get that bench going a little bit, because that was the key to South Carolina's success all year long, is just wearing people down with that second wave.
Brad Muller, the outstanding voice for South Carolina's basketball program. They'll tip tomorrow night at 7:00. How important is it to knock down some shots from outside, Brad, for someone like Joyce Edwards? You've already mentioned the height and the front court of the teams that are in this tournament, and that's one of the reasons that they've been successful against South Carolina this year. You mentioned UCLA. Carolina could draw them potentially in a national championship matchup. And for a young lady like Joyce Edwards, who quite frankly is really no longer a freshman,
right,
but has certainly seen her challenges over the last couple of weeks, if you're able to hit some shots from outside, that should make things maybe a little bit looser down there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. When you can knock down a few of the shots. If they're going to give you practice shots, especially if they're going to leave you open on the perimeter, you got to knock them down. And South Carolina has to do that consistently. That's the way it's been the previous years when the Gamecocks had All-Americans, in the middle, and everybody was zoning the Gamecocks the last 10 years. They were able to shoot around the zone and knock down those perimeter shots, and that just opens everything else up because then it pulls people out of the zones. Well, we're not seeing as much zone this year because there's not as much fear, if you will, for the inside game of South Carolina. So if they give you some open looks, you got to knock them down. But the other thing is the shot selection has to be where it is in the shot clock, because you don't want to see someone jacking up a 3 5 seconds into the shot clock, especially if it's one of our perimeter players, maybe that's shooting less than 30% from there. You want to try to work it in as much as you can. So shot selection and timing of some of those shots is going to be key.
TeHina Pao Pao last year in the Final Four, 24 combined points against NC State and Iowa, but she was also 8 of 14 from the floor and 5 of 9 from long range. This is her last go around. This is her last hurrah. She was a big part in why they were able to win it last year. And it kind of feels a little bit like this is where that veteran who is capable of hitting those type of shots emerges. This is the moment, right? How do you describe what you've seen on a TeHina Pao Pao here in the postseason for this team and how that could translate to tomorrow night and throughout the weekend?
She's changed her game a lot this year in terms of not just depending on her outside shooting. Her numbers from the outside are down this year compared to last year, but it's because she's been driving to the basket more and getting more 2-point baskets, if you will, which is not a bad thing. It's a higher percentage shot and it changes how the defense plays you. But yeah, you would love to see her get hot early because it's such a great tone setter when you can knock down a couple of shots early from your perimeter players. As we said, it opens things up. As you said, a kid, they got a lot of kids who will be playing in their last games, here in Tampa, and, someone who's had a huge impact since she transferred from Oregon a couple of years ago. She's capable of going off at any moment and hitting 3 or 4 in a row. And she's also become a better passer, I think, as well. As if she knocks down a couple of shots early and that presses more people on her, then that allows her to find people open under the basket, because I think she's very underrated in her ability to distribute the basketball as well.
Yeah, you mentioned Joyce's, struggles, and obviously, hopefully she's able to come around and get some things going, especially early when she gets in there and checks in tomorrow. But Khloe Kitts clearly has been the conversation for this team for really knocking on the door of a month. She's been outstanding, and early on in the last few ball games, she's been virtually unstoppable in the right place at the right time, cleaning up the boards, putting the ball in the hoop. And then there's been some adjustments, and she's kind of getting taken out of the game a little bit. But this Final Four, I think it's safe to say, right, if South Carolina wants to win a national championship, they're going to have the Khloe Kitts that they've been seeing at her best over the last few ball games, Brad.
Yeah, she's really become a leader on the floor for South Carolina the last month of the season. I think it started the second to last game of the regular season when she had that triple-double against Ole Miss, and then carried that momentum all the way through the SEC tournament, was the MVP of the SEC tournament, the MVP of the regional in Birmingham. So she's been consistently good, and if you can keep her out of foul trouble, that's the key too, because there's been some games she picks up some early fouls and she has to sit on the bench for a quarter or so. But there was a game in the regional where she put us on her back to start the third quarter because she was in foul trouble in the first half, scored 7 quick points, and it really seemed to energize the team. So right now she's kind of emerged as that go-to for South Carolina, and you hope that can continue. Because it's not just driving. She's done a great job of driving to the basket, and getting high percentage shots, but she's been hitting her mid range too. And then of course hitting the clutch free throws against Duke down the stretch was big as well. So if she can keep doing what she's doing, she gives South Carolina a chance.
Yeah, she's kind of mimicking her boyfriend a little bit. Every once in a while, she steps out from behind the arc, knocks one down. She's in the postseason. She's 2 of 3 from long range. Maybe she should shoot a few more out there.
Yeah, she's hit 7 of them on the year. She can hit if you leave her open. She can knock it down because it becomes a practice shot for her. She has that range. It's just most people don't leave her open out there, but she's not afraid to take it. Coach will tell her, especially if it's not early in the shot clock. If they're going to leave you open, take it.
Right. Yeah, no, there's no question about it. Yeah, when she hit that three against Duke, I thought, well, that's a really good sign, because if they're going to have to stretch the defense out here when she's standing around out there, somebody's going to have to be open somewhere. But Duke did I got to give them some credit. They played really well defensively against South
Yes.
Carolina. You know what I mean, Brad? You don't want to take that away from them, and they played
No, it's
really, really well.
and when you get this deep in the tournament, and as we talked about last week, there's more depth around women's basketball this year, where there's more good teams that are capable of beating you, and that's what you're seeing as South Carolina has won these nail biter games. There's just teams are good, and the margin for error for South Carolina this year is smaller because they don't have that All-American post that they've had the last 10 years. So you just have to grind it out, and now you're playing against a bunch of teams that are going to have the advantage in the post. So, South Carolina's going to have to find ways to grind it out again, starting with, Friday against Texas.
And continue to play defense like they've been playing. Watching Raven Johnson, for instance, play defense last week. She is just outstanding on that end of the floor. Let me ask you this, and we're not going to keep you very long because I know you got to work. So just a couple more minutes, we'll get you out of here. Do you believe? I mean, you've been to so many Final Fours now with this program. I'm sure remember what it was like walking in for the very first time.
Yeah, this gym
into this gym right here. And obviously this team has a couple of players that have never been in this type of environment, but the large majority of them have, and the coach has, and the staff. Yeah. Do you believe that there's any advantage when you get to the Final Four over teams, even though they might be good matchups for you, they might be nearly as talented or more talented, who knows, like UCLA and Texas, but do you believe that there's an advantage for teams who are used to the environment like the Gamecocks and the Huskies?
I think it helps a little bit initially, because there are so many distractions the days leading up to it, because there's so many interview sessions and things that they have to do just for TV. And then today they meet with all the media after practice, more interviews than they've done all year long. So, there are those distractions, and there's going to be those nerves at the beginning of the game. So I think that experience helps a little bit. But once the game gets going, I don't believe, the pressure, that jitteriness stays with you, even if you're a newcomer, because then you just kind of lock in, and it becomes another game. It's a big crowd. South Carolina's used to big crowds because, they've led the nation in attendance the last 10 years. So that's, in most of these teams, UConn and Texas and UCLA, their games are well attended as well. So it's not going to be anything spectacularly new. The first couple of minutes, if you've got a freshman or somebody out there, maybe it affects them, but I don't think it affects the players that much once the game gets going after a couple of minutes.
How many does Amalie Arena seat? Do you know?
About 21,000, I think. I think that's what it is for hockey. So it's probably about the same the way they've got it set up for basketball. So, but I think the official seating is about 21,000. So it's a big place, and it'll fill up. The last few Final Fours, you're playing in these huge arenas now that, it's amazing the support you've seen really in the last 10 years for women's college basketball. Used to be, I remember when I used to work at a D2 school, and the coach used to go to the Final Four every year because there's a convention here for coaches, and he would always talk about, he would just go around the day of the game and try to upgrade his tickets, and it wasn't a big deal. But now, it's hard to find tickets, and they ain't cheap. So, because believe me, I've had a lot of people ask, and no, I don't have any. So,
of course you have. That's what happens when you get deep in the postseason. Everybody wants tickets.
Yep.
What has been the vibe from this group since they've been there? Does Dawn have does she have a system, like a setup as far as how she does things when they get to the Final Four, and has that changed?
Well, no, because she does, she likes it to be normal. So nothing really changes unless it's mandated in terms of all the interviews that they have to do for the NCAA and all that kind of thing. So no, it's routine. The practices are routine. Yesterday we went and practiced over at the University of Tampa, and the practice I thought it was good. It was very spirited and positive. And I was actually sitting with some of the Tampa coaches who just wanted to watch us practice, and they were marveling at how, for 1 minute coach can be sitting there, with the very serious instruction of what she wanted for a specific drill or play they were defending. And then 10 seconds later, she's on the sideline goofing around and joking with her players about something and having a laugh. And that's just how it is. It's normal. There's not that sense of being uptight or anything like that. So no, she tries to make it as normal as possible.
No disrespect, Brad, but I did mute you a little bit last week. Dawn was talking with Chris Budden on television, and Chris asked her a question about basically what do you need to do to win the game, and Dawn said score one more point than they do. And and she kind of smiled and said, "Thank you, Chris," and walked away. And Chris laughed at it. Chris is excellent, by the way. I think she's fantastic at what she does. But when she said that, I thought there was a deeper meaning behind that. It was like, look, a lot of things are going to happen. You're going to have good plays. You're going to have bad plays. You're going to have good halves. You're going to have bad halves. You're going to have frustrating moments. You're going to have great moments. You have good stretches and bad stretches, runs, and they're going to run. At the end of the day, just win the game. Yep. And sometimes it feels like there are coaches who maybe try to be a little bit too fine with what they're trying to get their team to execute or do during a game. And there's no question that Dawn obviously wants her team to execute, and she's as hard on them as you could possibly imagine, even if it doesn't look like it sometimes. She's kind of scary. But her team understands it's really at the end of the day just about doing what it takes to win the game in that moment. I just think that that's an incredible message when you get this time of the year.
Yeah, and one thing you'll hear from Coach Staley over and over, whether it's game to game or play to play, is you got to turn the page. You got to move on. It's similar to a batter. If you strike out, all right, the next at bat, you can't think about that you struck out next time. You just got to go and look for a pitch to hit. It's the same thing. You got to turn the page and move on. And that's something she always preaches. It's funny you said that. Score more 1 point than the other team. The coach where I used to work at, he used to do that to me once a year in a pregame interview. I'd say, keys to the game tonight, coach. And he'd say, score more than they do, Brad. Duh. And he would do that to me once a year just to get me in my pregame interview. I'm like, thanks, coach.
It's very Steve Spurrier. What I mean?
Yeah.
Why'd you lose? What happened last night, coach? Well, they scored more points than we did. At the end of the day, that's why we lost. I'm not sure if they've all made their way down there just yet. We know that South Carolina's FAMs will be heavily in attendance. Have you seen a bunch of them, and what's that looked like?
Yeah, I have. Just walking around a little bit yesterday, and everywhere I go, see people just yelling "Go Cox" and things like that. So, especially in South Carolina, but UConn and Texas are going to travel well for this.
Absolutely.
Saw a lot of Texas fans in Birmingham, a ton of South Carolina fans in Birmingham. They may have just driven straight down, who knows, from Birmingham to Tampa and said, the heck with it, we're taking the month off. So I think, no doubt we're going to be well represented in the arena tomorrow. But from what I've seen so far, the UConn fans will travel well. The Texas fans will travel well. We'll see about UCLA. It's a long trip for them. I'm sure that they'll have fans here. I don't know how many, but we'll find that out tomorrow. But yes, it's going to be a lot of garnet and black, and then just a lot of women's basketball fans in general that make their plans to be here regardless. They hope their team's going to be here. Teams that are usually in the top 15 every year. So you'll see a smattering of other folks that just want to be here.
All right, final one for you. Not to in any way, shape, or form at all look to Sunday. Carolina tomorrow is going to be unbelievably difficult for this team to win, as we all know. If they are able to advance, is there a better matchup that would await them between UConn and UCLA?
It's interesting because, I think the tougher matchup on paper is UCLA because of their size and depth of size. They've got great guards, and their starters at the 4 and the 5 are huge, and they've got kids off the bench that are just as big. So I think that on paper makes it a tougher matchup. But as I said earlier, I think the team that's playing the best right now, from what I've seen, is UConn. Paige Beckers and Sarah Strong, the two of them have been unbelievable. They're a team that doesn't go deep into their bench, maybe 6 players total that you're really going to see contribute. But that's the way they've always been under Gino. And right now, his 2 best players are playing their best basketball. And I think you've seen that in the last 2 games. Sarah Strong got off to an unbelievable start the other night in the Elite 8. Paige Beckers has been unbelievable shooting the ball the last 2 games. So, I don't know if one is better than the other if you're a Carolina fan, if the Gamecocks win, and who you want to root for, because I think UCLA on paper is the tougher matchup. But I don't know that anybody's playing better than UConn is playing right now with the way their 2 stars are playing.
Yeah, I know a lot of the national narrative has been the fact that Southern Cal not being there, the star power of Juju Watkins. Well, Paige Beckers and Khloe Kitts and the Betts girl from UCLA. They're going, hey, we're stars too.
Yes.
If you don't mind, don't forget about us.
There's some really good basketball players. So yeah, it's I hate it for Juju because she is a talent. But yeah, there's going to be plenty of stars that are going to be shining here tomorrow night.
There's no question about that. As we pointed out last week, Brad, sometimes you just want to change seats with people. You would be the guy again this week. To be able to be courtside tomorrow night, 6:30, I believe, airtime, right, for you?
Correct.
On 107.5 in Columbia.
Yes, that's correct. And on the Gamecocks app if you're not in Columbia.
And on the Gamecocks app anywhere in the world. You can listen to the great voice of Brad Muller. Go get him, man. We really appreciate you squeezing some time for us. It means a lot. I know that you're busy, but can't wait for the call tomorrow night. Can't wait, hopefully, for 8 quarters of basketball this weekend and maybe another ring. You're going to have to grow another hand if they keep doing this.
Yeah, it's first world problems I've got, but I'm lucky just to be a part of it, and appreciate you having me on. And hopefully we're talking about a parade next week.
Man, I hope so. You're the best, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Have a great week.
Yes, sir. There you go. Brad Muller down at Amalie Arena in Tampa.